Hello and welcome to The Explainer. Tariffs. You hear that word all the time, right? It's always in the news, usually thrown around like a weapon in some kind of trade war. But have you ever really stopped to wonder? Seriously, think about it. When a country puts a new tariff on goods from another country, who is actually footing the bill? Where does that money come from? Well, the answer is way more complicated and honestly a lot more interesting than you probably think. Okay, let's really dive into this. To get to the bottom of this whole thing, we've got to start with the absolute basics. So, what exactly is a tariff in the first place? At its heart, a tariff is really just a tax. That's it. And it's not paid by some foreign government. It's collected by the government of the country that's importing the goods, the one bringing the stuff in. So the tax gets collected right there at the border by a customs agent the moment that product enters the country. Okay, so if the government is collecting this tax at the border, who's the one standing there, checkbook in hand, ready to pay up? And this brings us to a really, really crucial distinction. So to really get what's going on, you need to know the difference between two key ideas: legal incidence and economic incidence. Now, legal incidence is just a fancy way of asking who literally writes the check to the government. Simple enough. But economic incidence, that's the real story. That's about who actually feels the financial pain, who ends up a little poorer because of this tax. And you know what? Those two things are almost never the same. And that brings us to the first and maybe most surprising part of the answer: the company that imports the goods, a business located inside the country that set the tariff, is the one that pays the initial tax bill to its own government, not the foreign company, not the foreign country. An American company pays the American government, period. But come on, you know that company isn't just going to say, oh well, and eat that huge new cost, right? No way. So let's follow the money and see how the cost of that tariff actually creates a ripple effect all through the economy. The journey starts the second the importer pays that tax. But from there, that cost gets pushed around. The importer is probably going to raise prices for its customers. The foreign seller, well, they might have to lower their original price just to stay in the game. And that's how, in the end, the cost gets shared. Let's make this really concrete with an example. Okay, so picture this. A U.S. company wants to buy steel from Canada. Before any of this tariff business, the price for 1 ton of that steel is a nice clean $700. Then, bam, the U.S. government imposes a 10% tariff. Well, 10% of $700 is an extra $70 tax added right on top of that ton of steel. So that means the American importer now has to cough up $770 to get that steel. The original $700 still goes to the Canadian steel mill, but that extra $70, that goes directly into the U.S. government's pocket. But does the story end with the importer just eating a $70 loss? Not a chance. So what really happens to that $70 cost? It gets split. And this is the part most people miss. To stay competitive, that Canadian steel mill might be forced to lower its price. Let's say they knock off $20. So now they only earn $680 per ton instead of $700. On the other end, the U.S. importer passes the rest of the cost, the other $50, on to its customers, like a car manufacturer. Suddenly, that American car company is paying $50 more than it used to. And just like that, the $70 tariff has been split between the foreign seller and the domestic buyer. All of this price shifting creates this incredibly complex web of winners and losers all through the economy. It is never as simple as one country winning and another one losing. In our steel example, the U.S. steel mills are the obvious winners. Their foreign competition is now more expensive, so they can raise their own prices and sell more steel. But who loses? Well, the Canadian exporters, of course. But look closer. So do other U.S. industries. That American car company now has to pay more for steel, a basic raw material, which makes its cars more expensive to produce and maybe less competitive. And just when you think you've followed all the ripples, the economic story isn't over. Because very often, the country whose goods just got tariffed decides to retaliate with tariffs of its own. They hit back. So, for instance, Canada might fire back with a 20% tariff on U.S. whiskey. Suddenly, a Canadian distributor has to pay an extra $5 in tax on every bottle. That cost gets passed on to Canadian consumers. Back in the U.S., distillers might have to offer discounts just to keep their Canadian sales from drying up. And who's loving all this? You guessed it, Canadian whiskey producers. They just got a huge advantage. The whole cycle just starts over, but in reverse. So, after following the money all the way through the supply chain and even across the border and back again, let's return to our original question and finally settle the bill. This is the most common question, and honestly, the biggest misconception out there. This idea that the foreign country just sends a check. The answer is a clear and simple no. That is not how it works. The cost is a shared burden. It's paid initially by a domestic importer, but the financial hit gets spread between that company's customers at home and the foreign exporter who has to cut their prices to compete. So, the crucial points to remember are these. First, tariffs are a tax paid first by a country's own businesses. Second, that cost then gets shared by everyone in the supply chain, including you, the consumer. And third, while they might help one domestic industry, they often hurt others by raising their costs. It's a complex economic ripple effect. Which leaves us with one final thought. If tariffs are really a complex tax that raises costs for domestic companies and consumers, then why are they used at all? Well, that's a question that moves us beyond simple economics and deep into the world of politics, strategy, and international negotiation. Something to think about. Thanks for joining us on The Explainer.